Don't you? Thank you so much for coming out on a rather scrappy night out there. You know, we work so hard for these events. We work so hard at the programming, and then the day of, there's like nothing to do. And so I've just been pacing all day, just waiting to see you all, and I'm so happy that you're all here. So let's start. I really want to thank you for your, do we need to adjust the mic? Yeah, that's quite all right. Okay, can you hear me enough? Yeah, sounds good. And then I'm not bouncing, yeah. All right, thank you. So once again, I want to thank you so very much for being here as we launch a 4-part anti-racism series. We're calling it Being Black and White Spaces, and we're stealing the title from Ed's talk tonight, but it seems so appropriate. And then we're going to go into 3 community conversations over the next 3 months in March, April, and May that we hope tonight will inspire you to actually come to, because they're the most important parts of this. We want to gather your voices, we want to hear your ideas. We want you to know in advance that we do not have the answers to how to create Newburyport into an anti-racist community. But we also want you to know that we are very, very willing to stand in the question and in the not knowing, as long as we can do it together. That's the most important part. You know, the PEG Center has, for many years now, we have sort of designed our activism and then presented it to our community. And about 1.5 years ago, I started to feel like there's something missing in this. I feel like we're doing all this work and then we're sort of handing it to our community and saying, now you go do it this way. And more over the last year, we realized at the PEG Center that in order to be more relevant to our community, that we had to listen more, to not know the answers, to sit in circles with our fellow community and hear what your concerns are and listen to each other and figure out what we're going to do together. So that is part of what this series is all about. My name is Paula Esty, and I'm the Executive Director of the PEG Center for Art and Activism, and I am part of a team of collaborators that is bringing this series to our community. So I most especially want to recognize my colleagues at the YWCA, Amanda Bradbury, who's the head of youth services there, Ann Upton, who is the inclusion specialist, of course, Eddie Carson, and Julie Cook, who's part of the PEG team. I also want to thank the PEG program team for supporting us in this venture, and to FRSUU for offering us this beautiful space. It really is making quite a difference to launch our program here. Thank you also to PortMedia for filming what we're about to go through tonight, and it will be available on our YouTube station and on theirs as well. So this series was really a result of many conversations that Eddie, Amanda, and Julie and I had over the past couple of months. But it really began last summer when, you know, I knew Eddie Carson. Who doesn't know Eddie Carson? Which is, I think, what you said to me when we first met. I know you. You know, City Hall, the big hair, the big voice, the big message. Last summer, Eddie and I met in my backyard and we talked about anti-racism. And the key that I took away from that conversation was that anti-racism is different from being a non-racist, that it really is tipping the scale to a much bigger commitment all the way around. We started that conversation and then we went about our lives. It was a very busy year. And then in January, we started to meet all together with the YWCA, who the PEG Center had a wonderful working relationship with. Last February, we worked with Amanda and Ann and their after-school program at the Brez and did love notes to Uvalde and then shipped them out in a beautiful box. And I watched these 2 women talk to the children in their charge about something nobody wants to have to talk to a child about in the most careful and open and available way that I had ever witnessed before. So starting this year, I knew I wanted to work with them, and I didn't know how, so we just sat down and started talking. The top of all of our list was anti-racism. The second item on the agenda was how do we get change to actually happen here in Newburyport. We're comfortable, we're affluent, we're engaged, we're interested in this, but how do we really change the face of our community so that we live in integrity into the ways that we want to be activists? You know, we believe in all of this, but to be in integrity around our beliefs means we have to do something about this. And none of us really know how or what. But together, again, I think that we have a really, really good chance at figuring some things out that will actually change the face of our community. So this series is going to unfold over the next 3 months. Tonight is the launch. The following 3 events are called Community Conversations. They'll probably all take place at the Peg Center unless we outgrow them. But the first one is going to be leader-led by Ed Carson. And there will be people of color conversing at that community conversation. We will be invited into that conversation. It's on March 21st, Thursday evenings, 6:30 at the Peg Center. The next one is in April, and then the wrap-up one, which to me is the most important one, and I invite all of you and your colleagues to attend, is on May 16th, where we really start asking ourselves, okay, what's the agenda here, and what are we actually going to do? So, it is now my great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Eddie Carson, and let's see, I'm going to read from his bio. I really have to say that I've grown to love him. I love his passion. I love his pushback. I love how he's so careful about how he speaks about all of this, but he still is pushing the envelope all the time, and that's what we need so desperately. He's very soft-spoken at times, but his message is really intense. So here's about Eddie Carson. He's the Dean of Multicultural Education at the Governor's Academy and a leading organizer and activist. A 20th century historian of American race and religion, Carson earned a BA and an MA in history from Harding University. He teaches seminars on African American studies, race, class, and gender, and Black Christianity. His current research looks at race and ideology, particularly that of W.E.D. Du Bois, and he has published and presented papers that focus on Black identity, religion, Du Bois, and the nature of history teaching. He recently wrote a book chapter with Alden Morris entitled W.E.D. Du Bois, A Socialist and a Communist, published by Oxford University Press. Carson is a former editor for the Christian Century magazine and the Christian Scholars Conference Committee on Race and Religion at Lipscomb University. Joined by historians Philip Sinatier and Gerald Hone, they published Socialism and Democracy in W.E.B. Du Bois's Life, Thought, and Legacy. Carson also published Historical Thinking Skills with Routledge Press. Got a big resume. His wife and anti-racist partner, Jeanette Carson, is a community organizer for working class folks. Please welcome Eddie Carson.
I appreciate y'all coming out here tonight. Whatever you want to call this in the month of, is it March yet? I'm confused by the weather. You know, I appreciate y'all showing up. And I take showing up quite seriously, particularly because, as you're going to hear a little bit in terms of what I have to say, the key thing to all things, and particularly being transformational, is showing up, arriving, people who can depend on you to be present, to bring about the kind of changes that are needed and necessary within societies, regardless of where we fall along the color line. Before I engage in this talk, though, when we talk about community and community conversations, the word community is a word sometimes that's overused. It's misused. It's a word that I think we need to lean into a little bit more. And I think it would be just great if we would just take just a couple seconds here for a moment of silence for the loss of a community member and Reverend Helen Margate, who recently lost her life, as we all know, here in this community, in this town of Newburyport. So if you will, just take a moment of silence to recognize her and the life that she lived. Tomorrow at City Hall, I believe I got this correct, there will be a vigil in remembrance of her life at 6:30 tomorrow. And so I think it would be great for us to pay our respects to her, her family, and friends and other community members at 6:30. You know, I'm here and we listen to Paula. And the reality here, folks, is this, right? You know, I never said to her that I'm Eddie Carson. Of course, you know who I am. I said to Paula, you're Paula Esther, and we all know who you are. And I've known about you for a long time, my friends, and I can't believe that we're just now meeting. And it took a little bit of time for us to come around to a particular positionality, to find our place, to become close friends. And I like to think that's what we are here being in this space. Now, it is true, as we think about this for a little bit, there are a lot of folks who look like me in Newburyport nor in this space, and that's okay too, because I'm here to tell you, I am primarily here to talk to white folks, and I do that a lot. I talk to white folks because, you know, I have to be an actor on stage all the time. It's tactical. In many ways, being an actor is part of that survival aspect that you need in terms of navigating spaces. Being that actor on stage, that actor walking through different spaces is what you have to do when you look like me, because you just don't know the kind of spaces that you're navigating through and what's going to happen. And you see, my friends, getting up and talking and speaking to folks doesn't give me anxiety. It doesn't stress me. It doesn't even make me nervous. Better yet, I'm kind of energized right now being here with all of y'all. It's walking into spaces where I know oftentimes that many people will not look like me, and I just don't know how they're going to engage and behave with me and who I am. That I just don't know. Man, I almost blew you away. Those were the terrifying words of a white police officer. One of those who policed black bodies in low-income areas in the North Philadelphia area in the late 1970s. Who caught sight of a young black teenager walking down the street with a telescope in his hand, and the brother said, "Why would you have got that? It's a telescope." The police officer turned to him for a second and said, "It looked like a weapon." And then the conversation became something like, "A weapon?" The law enforcement person responded by saying, "Yeah, I thought you had a weapon." The words made me tremble and pause. I felt the sort of bodily stress and deep existential anguish that no teenager should have to feel about the realities of their life because they become a danger for the fact that they exist and they walk in a black body in white spaces. I can't control that. If you're a person of faith, then you give thanks to whoever created us. If you're a person of science and humanity and in the world, and the spiritual elements that are here, we want to thank me for being who I am, but yet here I am, and I'm apologizing for being black in a black body. Something beyond my control, but something I've leaned into and something that I've come to understand. You see, as New York Times columnist George Yancey stated, I just did not know what that was going to be like in the 1970s. And here I am in the 21st century, and I'm still having these conversations with young folks living and existing in black bodies and navigating and working their way through white spaces. That fear, that terror that happens. Being black in white spaces it's an ethnographic behavior of the reality of black people and the dawning that comes with the experience of being black in this world. It's one of those things in which we become the day-to-day reporters of life in terms of what's happening, folks. We, in many ways, can be newspaper columnists, news reporters, because we're publishing and we're telling folks every single day about a different experience that transpired for us. Something that folks look at us and they don't even believe us. Wait, you're telling me at Yale University that someone called the cops and arrested you because you're a student and you're taking a nap on the couch in the lounge of a dorm because you're black and folks couldn't believe that you belong on a college campus? Is that what you're saying? Or is it one of those things where a brother who was recently speaking at Phillips Academy was out in Central Park bird watching, and we all know that story, and had folks call the cops on him because clearly he doesn't belong in such a white space as Central Park. And yes, Central Park is it's a public park, but Jim Crow once existed in this country. Segregation was a reality, and even here in the 21st century, oftentimes we still find it difficult to imagine spaces being open to people who operate black bodies in white spaces, such as myself. Those things are realities as we continue to report the news, the daily microaggressions due to racial barriers that are firmly entrenched in our world. Some have come to call this symbolic racism. That's the word. Symbolic racism. And this practice and this art of symbolic racism comes from folks who sometimes will act in a sense that I'm not a racist person. I want to engage with people in different ways, and I'm not behaving in a capacity to bring fear and terror and trauma to someone who's in a black body. Someone who maybe a darker skinned person, woolly hair, that they lean into in terms of the funk and the spirit of who they are. You see, this symbolic racism has come to define racism in America, and it's really the cause of the stubbornly powerful stereotype of what we call the ghetto being embedded into the social structure of white imagination here in this world. That's what has come. This notion of hood life for black folks, we can't clear it out of our minds. We can't step away from this idea that there's a predacious elements about black men who operate white spaces. That fear and that sense sometimes when we get nervous, when we see someone in a white space that doesn't look nor seem like they belong in that space, because the reality is when I look around, I don't see anyone in my neighborhood nor in my community who looks like that. And see, at that particular point, the conversation should change. Not, why is that brother Eddie Carson one summer going to meet Sister Paula Esty at her house? And we had a little miscommunication. Because Paula being a trusting person, doors wide open, not home, somewhere else, I have no idea, and I can't remember, Paula, where you were. And I'm knocking on the door, and then I'm walking around back. That's dangerous behavior on my part right here, folks. I'm walking around, creeping and looking and trying to figure out, why, yeah, I know the sister said we're going to meet her at this time, and she ain't here. Then I even had another dangerous thought. Her door's not locked. Maybe I just invite myself into her home and wait for her, because she knew I was coming, and I gotta be feeling safe about this. Maybe I'll do that. But I didn't go quite that far. You see, I sat there for a second and I paused, because one of the things that happens here is the fact that I reminded myself that, one, I wasn't invited in, it's not my home, and at that point we don't have that kind of relationship. Two, I became consciously aware of the space and the environment that I was in, right here in good old Newburyport. As I walked around to the front door, I think I texted or called or I did something, I'm like, where you at? We're supposed to show up. We got a meeting and a conversation to have. And I'm sitting there just waiting. And waiting and waiting. My friend Paula's on her way home. As the white folks walk down the road. And as they walk down the road, they give me that stare that I know what it looks like and what it feels like because I've experienced that stare before. Who is that? Why is he there? And then they looked and they walked down the road a little bit more. And, you know, I told you from the start, I'm an actor on stage. Whether it's tactical or survival or seeking acceptance or just filling in the way that I have to, I sat there for a second and I smiled. I put on my best face, right? I wanted to make sure everyone looked okay and felt comfortable because, see, when you're a person that occupies a black body in white spaces, you have to do that. I work hard oftentimes to make sure that white folks feel comfortable being around me. Because I don't want them to sweat and I don't want them to feel nervous. I don't want them to have to cross the street as sometimes they often do in towns. Shift their purse to the other side because they're nervous about my presence, my size. Right? Those are the things that are there. Or, my favorite, it's when they take the elbow up quietly, easily, and they lock the door. So you don't notice nor do you see that happening. And see, my friends, you talk to any BIPOC person, you talk to a black person, and you sit down and you say, man, I just heard this brother Eddie Carson give up and get a talk, and here's some of the things that he shared. I'm curious, have you ever experienced that before? I am not making a generalization, folks. Everyone's experience is different, and everyone, the aspects that they've engaged in has been that way. They may say, absolutely. Let me tell you a story or two or three or four. You see, when we think about this embedded notion of white imagination, which subconsciously connects all black people with crime, poverty, little education, and no empathy, regardless of their social status within society, these are the concepts of white spaces that become so ubiquitous and so framed and ingrained that they formulate what we call this symbol, this symbolic notion of that is how people act and behave. And I'm going to talk to all of you good old white folks out here, because I'm glad you showed up. Because you came here because you're curious about what I have to say. You want to lean into this. Some of your faces I know, and some of you always show up, and I appreciate that. And I worry about the folks who never show up. Where are they? Where are they? The folks who need to hear this message as y'all become the disciples of my message and the message that we're trying to propagate out there, in which we have to expand the realm of understanding from people who are there. You see, the concept of white spaces is more than a symbol, and it's not a metaphor for how we exist in this country. It is not. White people typically avoid black spaces, but black people are required to navigate the white spaces as a condition of our existence. You go back to most towns and communities, one of the things you find out is we're in the 21st century and people think that we've moved away from the segregation of Jim Crow in the 1960s. Let me tell you, my friends, America is more segregated in the 21st century today than it ever was in the 1960s and 1970s. And yet we've reached this place where we're colorblind. Why is Brother Carson talking about this stuff? Why is the YWCA and the PEG Center holding community conversations about this? These things only make the problems worse, and they're never going to go away if we're going to continue to talk about it. But yet, we've never really talked about it. We've never really confronted these realities that are there. We talk about white people navigating white spaces and the conditions of that in which they avoid black spaces. This symbolic racism makes blacks uniquely vulnerable to the implicit biases in police stops, racial discrimination, of the simple task of ordering food in a restaurant. That feeling when you walk into a space and you're sitting there and you're looking at whether it's snacks or you're looking to purchase something, and that radar goes off in your head. See, people talk about mental health and trauma quite a bit all the time, but let's talk about the trauma that exists among black people here in the 21st century. The formation of feeling paranoid everywhere you go, looking over your shoulder, afraid of what's going to happen to you. The reality of if things don't go perfect, what might that next narrative mean? What does that mean for me? For someone who occupies a black body, that trauma that exists, that feeds that paranoia, folks. When I notice a person sitting there wiping down the same space for a long period of time just to get a good look and watch what I'm doing while I'm in their space, to follow me and pretend that they're not following just to make sure I don't shoplift. Being a pedestrian in the United States is not a simple matter. It's a challenging matter. And it's one of those things that's not going to shift nor go away anytime soon. And it's one of the things that we have to confront, folks. You see, not all things white folks do are bad. I like it when, I'm going to tell you this. I like it when white folks try too hard. Raise your hand if you're one of those white folks that try too hard. There we go, absolutely. I like it when white folks try too hard. Oh, I'm always amused. My favorite thing that I tell folks is if you want to have an experience with me, go out to dinner with me one evening. Go out to dinner. I was looking for a chair to pull up. Because folks may just invite themselves to the table and have a conversation with you because they're just so excited to see a black folk. Or a black person, right? They want to lean in and they want to talk to you all the time. You know, they want to do those things. And there's one thing about trying too hard. Another thing with my wife, married to this white sister who sees a lot of things. Because when you've been around me, she becomes invisible in my space. People just, it's not like, not an interracial couple I'm looking at. Right? Oh my goodness, it's like aliens from Mars. I'm just going to lean in, I'm going to stare. Never seen that before. Look, Bob. Think they're from Mars? Maybe just Alabama or something like that. She becomes invisible because, you see, we can walk into a restaurant or into a space and folks will acknowledge us and they'll acknowledge me for a second. They'll talk to us. Trust me, I hear this all the time. She reminds me. We'll go back to that same place, but she'll walk in ahead of me. They have no idea who she is. And I'll show up. Oh, okay, I see what's going on. My favorite thing, of course, is when folks are trying to get a good look at you, and they like trip and fall or they're stumbling over themselves. Right? That's always amusing in many ways. Always catches my guard. Growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, I recall the general rules of blackness. And this is the rule that all moms give to their black kids, particularly their black sons. Things such as, when you're speaking in front of white folks, make sure you use the right language. You can't use any of that hood talk because I've already told you within the imagination that's ingrained in whiteness, when we talk about symbolic racism, then boom. There you go. I knew it. Brother Carson doesn't know English. Wearing a hoodie. That promotes this idea of thug life. The most dangerous one, my wife can vouch for this because I was still doing this. used to struggle with insomnia a lot when I was in high school, and I struggled with insomnia for a large period of my time. I'd go days without sleeping. You know, studying for me in high school and college was easy. I just didn't sleep for a few days. Got a lot of work done, folks. It was unbelievable. And yet, some of the ways that I would try to, for committing a crime by which you have not done. 2019, I had the opportunity to have dinner with Tamir Rice. Raise your hand if you remember Tamir Rice. All right, a number of folks remember Tamir Rice. I had dinner with Tamir Rice's mom, and it was great. We were in Chicago at the time, this big activist gathering and everything, and she was the keynote speaker that was invited down there by the organizers from Ohio. And the thing that we talked about, and I was amazed at how well she was able to do it, because I just wouldn't be able to keep a straight face and keep things together, is this idea that folks describe Tamir, who's a 12-year-old boy, as a black man, someone occupying in a black body, in less than 2 seconds shot him because he was in a park with a toy gun. No pause, no thought, no action, no behavior to engage in that particular way. It's the reasons why our moms, our partners, even me, get nervous when I get pulled over and I start looking under the seat and all over places looking for my wallet because I'm concerned about that. It's the reason why when folks who look like me, when we show up on campuses or we in various businesses or whatever, we're looking for a job. We have to perform. Hi, Paula. Hey, it's good to see you. I'm really excited about this job. And the thing that I'm most excited about is the ways in which, whatever the ways in which may be, within the ways in which, that whatever the ways in which may be. Because you see, I need to perform in the ways that may be in a tone that is not threatening, without ego. I've got to clamor down, make myself a little less confident. I've got to redirect my smile in the way I engage, because you see, I can't intimidate white folks because they already have this predisposition about my behavior, because in many ways, part of it and some of it's not completely their fault, but it's been ingrained in society into them where it becomes this subconscious reality that's there. But I was once a fool. I remember when I was naive. I went to a predominantly white high school, private high school. Not because we could afford for me to go there, right? But I went there. I was one of 2 black students that graduated from my high school class while there. And the operation of being there allowed me to see things and think, wow, this is challenging, this is interesting, and it's terrible. But yet, racism will be done by the time I'm at the age that I'm at right now. I told folks, I kid you not, that, what year is it, 2024? 2024, that there would be no racism by this point. The world would look different. We would have integrated in different ways. Folks would have changed. The white parents who are raising their little white daughters wouldn't fear the black man such as me, and whom they have to sit beside within the public space of their schools, in which they put them in those schools, in those places, because they wanted them to hide out. That the world would be different by 2024. See, I was naive. I was optimistic. I believe that would be the case. And that is not the case, folks. And part of the reason that is not the case is because, as Paula shared with me earlier before this talk, people ask that sister, why don't you dial it down just a little bit? Why do you have to be, back there talking to a black person, so aggressive? Why do you act that way? Why do you care so much? Why do you do the things that you do? You see, it becomes customary, primary, It becomes a reality as white folks really enter spaces and they feel really good about anti-racism. They feel great about the changes that are going to happen and going to transpire and transformational. I'm okay with that. I want to put my Black Lives Matter sign outside. I want to do that. I want to organize and I want to protest for Black lives. I want to perform in all the ways in which everyone can see me perform, because I know that's what I'm supposed to do as a good liberal white person. It's like going to church every Sunday. Well, not this church. Let's go to the Southern Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. As a better example. And then let's go out and do the things that we just forgot the centrality of the message about radical love all of a sudden. You see, we can do all those things. White folks can do that stuff. And yet, when their number's called, when they have to lean in, when they have to commit to a radical transformation of a community, now they get nervous. What does this mean for my property taxes? What does this mean in terms of the spaces that occupy Newburyport or whatever town you want to call it? Because it doesn't take much. This becomes one of those things where we can talk about Brother King every January. But let's just make sure we don't talk about Brother Malcolm X in February 21st when he passed away. That's a different kind of black man, right? We don't want to talk about that. Let's lean in and let's think about the things that 20th century literary scholar James Baldwin once reflected. And he reflected at one point that he was not an integrationist because he did not want Black America to be integrated in a burning house called America, trapped in that reality that's there. He didn't want that for folks. And for all of y'all who know that awesome queer brother named James Baldwin, we know that he leaned into notions of interracialness in order to bring about some of the systemic changes that are necessary. Baldwin stated, I quote, "I cannot accept the proposition that the 400-year travail of the African American should result merely in his attainment of the present level of American civilization." He can't do that, can't rest on that. Is this America and this is what we have for black folks? You see, I had these conversations with my mother, who was 15, let me get it right. She was 14 in 1965 when she graduated, but when the Voting Rights Act was passed. Here we go. We're making progress. Change is going to happen. Then we get to 75, 85, 95, 2024. And now people are saying, we're talking too much about DEI. We're talking too much about anti-racism. We're talking too much about all of this stuff. And some of you folks hear the problem. I know they think I'm the problem. It's okay if we look good doing it and we say the right things, but yet when we actually have to put our money to the right situation in the right place, even worse, even if we have to show up and be present, if we have to have that challenging conversation with a family member who is not cooperating or who's on board, but who's espousing racist behavior and engaging in problematic acts, or that boss we have who we know is engaged in egregious behavior that's problematic, but yet we're a little too nervous, and I understand and I get it, to speak against or say something about that. Or when we have to call out elected officials who don't show up, don't participate unless a camera's on them in order to bring about some of these changes that are necessary. Right? These are the things that we have to be willing to challenge. Because, see, I need you to lean in closer to me and recognize that my blackness is beauty. My blackness is not designed nor meant to be a place for trauma, for fear, for looking over my shoulders every day and feeling nervous about what's going to happen next. When I walk down the street at night, that I don't need. And then I sit there sometimes and I think about the young folks. I think about the 5-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, folks who are growing up at that age in a different world, who are congregating and engage with friends who look different from them, and yet the question sometimes goes in your mind and you think, what is being said though? When the black kid goes home and the white kid goes home into that household about their relationship. I can speak from firsthand that I know exactly what those conversations look like. Having your heart broken as a kid when your friend was white when you're a little kid. And you're thinking, this is great, and their parents love me, and they think the world in our relationship, and yet you discover the other conversations that were being had in private spaces. Don't get too close. You're different from them. All of those things become problematic. You see, the American future is precisely as bright or is as dark as we want it to be. You know, James Baldwin, and I love Baldwin. You'll hear me talk a lot about Baldwin, about Du Bois. I can go on and on and on. And as he goes on to say that he loved America. And he loved America in the same way that he loved himself. And that's not arrogant, because see, Baldwin was a great critic of himself as he was fiercely, relentlessly, and most of all, critical of himself through the examination of things that needed to change. See, for Baldwin, he contained within his humanity this sense of American terror. And that American terror was magnificent and potential, a potential that would never be fulfilled by defining and redefining the American categories of color that had trapped all of us into this hierarchical sphere since birth. Colored folks over there, we don't say colored folks, and we don't say colored folks over there, and white folks over there, but yet we say it in different ways, right? We would never have a sign here that said no colored folks allowed in Newburyport. So here's what we're going to do instead. We're just going to create these invisible barriers that don't say no colored folks, but yet we're going to do it in a way to make sure some of them don't occupy nor live in this space. Well, Brother Carson, you know, it's hard for white folks to live in this space. And yeah, it is hard for white folks to live in this space. What do you want us to do? I want you to step out of whiteness and stop making it about you and lean into the things that we have to do in order to be transformational. So we're not going to put a no colored folks allowed. We're just going to make it difficult to engage and make people feel invited and comfortable into these spaces. You see, and I'll say a little bit more in a second in terms of my call to action, but a little preview for you. What are you doing to be transformational within this community as an anti-racist? What levels in which you stepped out of your comfort zone to be transformational, to redefine? I'd be curious. You got white kids going to an all-white high school who've probably never seen nor had a black teacher a day in their life. Now, that doesn't always look all that different in the private schools in the area too, so let me go ahead and say that, right? But that's challenging, right? Anyone lean in and say, what do we need to do to make that change, right? We're bringing up young folks who don't engage with folks nor have teachers in front of them that look a certain way. We're just going to let it rest because we're comfortable with that. There's nothing we can do, so we're just going to leave it alone? Is that what we're going to do? Is that what y'all going to do? Because see, I'm asking you to do something different. I'm asking you to have a much different narrative, particularly in thinking about how black folks, black bodies operate and feel in these white spaces that are here. Racial progress is needed to recognize the political reality of skin color and the suffering it would continue to bring, while insisting that the value placed on the color of skin is always and everywhere and forever a delusion. We now face a moral reckoning in this country. And we've heard that word a million times since George Floyd, and now we're tired of talking about George Floyd. We're now tired of talking about anti-racism work and community work that needs to happen. Americans have to decide whether this country, or better yet, as I like to remind folks, we can't control the country. Let's start off with our own community right here. Let's start off with here in our backyard. Let's start with things that we control in which other places and other folks may want to emulate, and let that spread and it be expansive into other communities throughout the country. Those are the ways that we make those real radical changes right here. That prolific voice that's always going out to saying, we're better than this, we're going to do more than this, but what are we doing wrong? Everything just seems fine. Exactly. Because see, whiteness is a normative reality. I wake up every single day, folks, and I'm reminded that I'm black, that I'm a black man in this town, I'm a black man in this country. I walk out the door, I get in my car, I show up to work, I go to the store, I go to the restaurant, it doesn't matter where I go. Every place I go, I'm reminded that I'm a black person here because A, I'm probably never going to see someone else who looks like me. And then when I do see someone else who looks like me, I probably act like the white folks. I just stare. I'm like, brother, where'd you come from? I don't tell my wife, but I'm telling him, hey, brother, let me get those digits. All right, I'm going to call you a little bit later. Because you know, these spaces here among whiteness is ideal. It's like a Hallmark movie, right? You ever watch those Hallmark movies? I bring this up all the time. Yeah, picturesque village, a lot of snow, everyone's straight, white, affluent, right there. It's like, wow, this is a perfect world if the Puritans were still navigating around, okay? Those are the things we think about. But think about it, folks. Think about the fact that for a lot of us here, and I want to be careful, I'm making a generalization, you only think about whiteness when someone forces you to think about your whiteness, because it's average, it's ideal, it's perfect. It is what we want. And keeping that whiteness the way it is sometimes keeps us from engaging in people of color because we don't want anything to be complicated in those ways that are there. As we think about this moral reckoning that was transformational. One of my favorite thinkers is this 19th century French scholar, Alexis de Tocqueville. And Alexis de Tocqueville was watching the experimentation of the United States. And one of the things that he thought about is the fact that going back to his travels here during the 19th century, he said, I'm curious about this thing called American democracy and what does it look like? And he wrote about this in his book, The Future Conditions of the Three Races That Inhabited the United States. And one of the things that he concluded when coming here and taking a tour and moving around in different spaces is that he could not conceive of a multiracial democracy ever being in existence in the United States. And he's saying that back in the 19th century, folks. We're here now in the 21st century, and we have this notion of white anxiety that has emerged. This idea of white anxiety that I've heard 2045, I've seen it go as move up to 2041, that by that date, white people for the first time in a country that was never really designed to be multiracial, though the history that people want to tell, oftentimes tell something differently, will look different. White people will be in a minority for the first time. And that is scary. What does that mean? Does that mean by 2041, I'm going to see a lot of 80s running around here? Does that mean by 2041, that ghetto imagination that is conceived within the mentality and the mind of white folks is going to exist? And I have fear? No. Because see, that's just racial demographic numbers. Because see, by 2041, it'll probably still be challenging for black folks, BIPOC folks, and other folks to live in the community. That's going to be reality. It's going to be real. I need white folks to lean into me. I need white folks to lean into me in a way in which they're okay by the fact that I've given them permission to lean into me, to be my friend, to ask me the hard questions. That's okay. I invite that. Not everyone does, but that's what I do. I am trained, I'm ready, I'm engaged. That's something that must happen. You see, when we think about, for white folks here, for you, my call to action to you is really simple. I want you to be conscious. Now, Fox News will call that being woke, but we're going to call that being conscious for right now. Right? I want you to be conscious. I want you to be cognizant of your whiteness. Whiteness is a racial identity, folks. There are racial identity models for whiteness. I want you to understand that and think about that. I want you to train your mind. Second thing that I want to challenge you to do. Be conscious, one. Number two, train your mind to spot your own implicit behavior. So I'll have a little honest showing here. Raise your hand if you've ever had that thought creep into your mind when you saw someone who looked different than you. Just kind of a show of hand. I appreciate all the honesty. Absolutely. I appreciate it. Because while that creeps into your mind, think about the trauma that person occupying that black body's experiencing, navigating through white spaces, knots in their stomach, wondering and curious about how am I going to be received or even perceived in this space. That's what's going on the other side. Train your mind to spot that implicit behavior. That takes work. That takes work. Third thing I want you to do is when someone gives you permission to engage and ask questions that you don't know if you should ask those questions. That is, I am giving you permission to ask me here in a second. I don't want you to sit back. You got me here at the podium. I don't want people to judge me. I'm the champion, super anti-racist, super liberal in the community. And if I ask that question, then I may just open up the flood doors for folks knowing who I really am. Guess what? No, we already know. We know. And that's why I'm inviting you to do that. I want you to create an action plan. And it doesn't have to be some big strategic study. It can be something as simple as, may I have Brother Carson over for dinner one night. You see what I just did? I like Bordeaux's, Cab Sauvignons. Those are the things that I like. Create an action plan. It can be something small and simple. People think too big and they get overwhelmed and they can't achieve nor accomplish those things. Don't do that, folks. Don't stress yourself out. Next thing I'm going to tell you to do, stop being ashamed to be white. Nothing wrong with being white. Don't be ashamed to be white. Lean into that whiteness. But think about the privilege that comes along with whiteness and what you can do with that. Don't walk around with white guilt. Do that. That didn't solve any problems right there. And do the thing white people love to do. Join a book club. Join a book club. And no, seriously, yeah, join a book club. There's nothing wrong with joining a book club. But if you're going to join that book club, go a little bit beyond that and connect that back to your action plan. As I bring a close to this, I just want to share a small piece of this sense of black invisibility. When I was in high school, in my white school, we didn't read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I had to have a friend of mine, this black sister, who was transformational in my life, who introduced me to Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And one of the things that Ellison stated in his prologue really illustrates this sense of invisibility and the fact that I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids. And I might even be said to possess a mind along the way. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in a circus sideshow. It is though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves. Figments of their imagination indeed, everything, anything they see but me. Because I am invisible as I occupy this black body in this white space. He goes on in that prologue to talk about how he once had a conflict with a white man, and he was outraged as he was in New York. And with that conflict, this white man used a racial epithet, threw out the N-word at him. And Ellison, his protagonist, reached for a knife out of frustration. And he got ready. I'm gonna stab this man. I'm angry. I'm so mad. And man, think about that for a second. Think about the anger and the trauma and the frustration that black people experience every single day in white spaces. The fact that sometimes we don't even know how we feel, if we're well, if we're safe. That hesitation and that pause as we lean in and we move forward. And Ellison said for a second at Central Park that he just wanted to stab the man out of frustration in his novel. And then he paused and he said, but it's not his fault. Poor fool didn't even see me. Because while on one hand my blackness makes me visible and a threat, on the other hand, it makes me as ubiquitously invisible as the day I woke up and walked out my front door. Thank you, folks.
Hi, my name is Amanda Bradbury, and I'm the Youth Services Director for the YWCA. I'm also the chair of our Racial Justice Committee. And here with me is Ann Upton, who also serves on our Racial Justice Committee and works as our inclusion specialist in all of our youth services. So at this time, Ann's gonna move through the audience here. She is a microphone and she's ready. We would love to take some questions for Eddie. So if you have a question and you just put your hand up.
Question, comment?
You have a couple up here, Ann. I see one in the front and then you have one this way as well.
Feel free to introduce yourself if you'd like to.
My name is Rose King, and I live here in Newburyport. And as I listen to you speak, thank you so much for your work. Did you hear me?
I heard you.
I think one of my frustrations is that since I've retired, when I was working, I was in black spaces a lot as a nurse. And now that I'm retired and I live in pretty pretty much the Lily White neighborhood, and I grew up in Needham, which is even whiter. So, you know, what is my role? You know, I don't want to be one of those people that overacts and, you know, let me go into Amesbury and see if I can find anybody.
I love that. I love that. And you know, and here's how I would respond, right? You don't want to overly perform. Now again, you could always invite me over to dinner, and I like tabs and Bordeaux's, and I'll keep going and we'll talk from there. But you know, I think it's interesting. I get a chance to speak at different schools and institutions, and one of the things they tell me is, in our place, there are no people of color. So how do we engage in anti-racism work when we're just in a white space where there aren't folks who look like me or otherwise? And then I tell them, but you're surrounded by folks who are going to also navigate throughout other communities, and they're going to engage in different ways. I think your role is part of your role that you showed up here tonight to listen. Your role is the fact that you're going to continue to follow this series as we think about what are the things collectively and within memory and reflective of how we're going to be transformational in terms of what happens here. I think your role is how we talk to other white folks in these spaces, is how we make notice, the way we become conscious of our own identity. I love the fact that you've navigated through black spaces, right? And that right there is a conversation I have with folks, because a lot of white folks have not been nor navigated in white spaces. I once told someone, I'm going to tell this story briefly, that, you know, I told you I'm married to a white woman, and she's used to being in black spaces. I mean, my whole life, I've existed in a lot of white spaces where she's been in more black spaces than I've been in. And for the fact that we're from the South, Alabama and Arkansas, spent some time in Texas, we're used to that. I told a person, you know, every year we go back down south, particularly Memphis. We like it. And I said, there's just a lot of, it's nice to be around a lot of people who look like you from time to time, because you don't get that. And this person turned to me and said, oh, your wife, is she okay with that? Almost like it's frightening that she may have to congregate and be around black people. Then I had to remind her for a second. Am I that invisible to you? Have I been that tokenized in white spaces? So I think that's it. I think it's this opportunity that we're constantly talking about this to a point where it's not always the work of people who look like me to talk to white people about this. I think that becomes the story and the narrative that's there. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, I'm just going to move over here for the next question.
Hey, Eddie.
Hey, Rich.
How you doing?
Oh, brother, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, too. If you had to maybe pick one or two things that you think are the bigger obstacles to having Newburyport be more welcoming to people of color, both just to come here and be here, maybe visiting, or to actually live here. What do you think? One or two of those things?
That's a good question, and you know, I'm gonna say this kind of the stream of conscious reaction response to that. You know, my first thing, and I'm not placing any judgment at all. That's not what I'm doing. Black people sometimes have a visceral reaction to law enforcement that feels militarized. I understand. No, I don't. I've heard. I'm going to call out Donna Holliday, who's here, because I appreciate her having a good conversation with me about this once, and really moving me along from her conversations, because she's great at leaning in and talking to people about why, if you're in law enforcement, you have that Blue Lives thing up there. But having a flag outside of the police department, to me, doesn't necessarily make me feel safe at all, if I had to point out one thing. But again, I appreciate my friend Donna really moving me along to understand that a little bit more, and then I have. But if I had to point out one, that would be the first. You know, the second one would be, it's just hard to imagine that there's a public high school without any people of color, unless I'm being ignorant and I'm wrong, and feel free to correct me later, where there are no non-white folks for white people to even see, let alone black students to see within a school. To me, that's an egregious crime that should be prioritized, and an initiative and effort should be made to change that. There should never be an institution where there's no one that does not look like you, especially when you're talking about educating young folks. Never.
I think you have one right over here, Ann. You have one. Yeah, sure.
Thank you for coming in this space and being your genuine self. It takes a lot to do that. I am a member of this church, and on Sundays we often hear people talk about their spiritual journey. And today we're getting that on a Tuesday night, and it's not even service. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will say that I really appreciate your comment about diversifying faculty, staff at the high school. But I think we can't ignore the fact that just putting people of color in positions is not enough. We need to make people feel welcome. We need to create a space where we see people as individuals with multiple dimensions. And so I fear that just hiring people because of the color of their skin, and I know that's not what you're suggesting, I fear that if we went to that, like a simple solution, we would fail and say, see, it didn't work. I really appreciate a more stepped and conversational approach, which it seems like Peg is proposing, so thank you for that, and thank you for being here.
I appreciate it, absolutely. And just one comment, you're absolutely right. The infrastructure's got to be right. But we've got to be careful too of what I call gradualism. That in that gradualism, it just, we're just not there yet. We're not there. We know Thomas Jefferson was the master of gradualism. And it took to 1961 and really 65 to solve one problem, and that dilemma never really fully came to fruition even here in the 21st century. But I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. Thank you.
All right, we're coming down to like the last 5 minutes. I know we have 3 hands up. Just remember, you can always come to these next conversations and bring all of these questions with you, and we really hope you will.
And I'll try to be brief too.
Hello, this is Joe Vecchione. I was wondering, CRT is not taught in any public school, K through 12, and yet the media is not pushing back and saying that's wrong. How can we fight that?
It's interesting, and even on my podcast, Race Matters, I have two shows dedicated to talking about CRT. Most people don't, as someone who fully reads and understands CRT, critical race theory, and I am fully versed, most people don't understand, nor do you have the time to do it. The only thing I ask folks to do is small things, and that is teach the history as it's meant to be taught, right? Lean into celebrations that exist. Talk about the inequities and the disparities within society and how do those things connect to the past, right? That all falls under that, and if people are talking about that stuff, then truth is going to come out. And we're not making stuff up.
May I make a comment?
Of course.
I want to relay an anecdote about when Amanda and I were talking about all of this a few weeks ago, and she told me a story about a friend of hers. She lives in Haverhill, which is a much more diverse community, as we all know. But a friend of hers came to one of our Friday night invitation nights, a person of color. And
She worked with me here in town too. Yeah.
And she ended up saying, you know, it's very beautiful here, and I don't feel welcome on the streets here. One thing I want to say is, let's not take too long, because the fact of the matter is that if there were people of color that owned businesses on our main street, that we would be exposed to multicultural, to having people of color, to them being able to mirror back to their own people of color so that they did feel more welcome here. There are things that we can literally do. So,
Thank you. Excellent.
All right, Ann, you have two friends over this way, and then you have one friend up the middle. We'll get you three in, and then we'll finish up.
So my name is Judy Timon, and I am going to do a shameless plug for the Housing Choice Coalition. That is an initiative of the YWCA. And I would encourage all of you to continue to participate in these conversations. And I will be coming back to the main meeting to talk more about the coalition and how you can join us and work with us to change the housing policies in Newburyport. The policies that do create not only segregated communities, but exclusive white majority communities such as the one we have here. And now that's a big thing. And I know you talked about, don't focus on doing some of the smaller things, but I think if we work together, that we can change some of the bigger things. And I think that would make us a more welcoming community if we had more diverse housing choices.
Absolutely. Thank you. One quick echo to that point too to keep in mind is that's part of the structural stuff. And right, one of the things we're going to do as we move forward in our final meeting is I'm hoping folks here, people show up as we actually create an action plan. What are the things tactically that we have to do? And that's part of it, right? That's part of, anyone own a bank? Anyone a CEO of a bank? Whatever? In this space? Yeah, because if you're here, let's start here. Let's talk about the problem of credit when it comes to people of color. Right? We can go on and on and on about the ways that are problematic and the ways that we can bring about some of those changes that are there too, but I digress.
Hi, my question is about class.
Mm-hmm.
For many years, I've been here 23 years, Newburyport had a real working class community, white working class. We have become so gentrified. I think our zoning and our housing issues have been such that we've pushed the working class out of Newburyport. And these systemic issues, as you described, are not only obstacles to blacks moving in, but we have a very upper class white community, and the structural issues, the gentrification, just seems insurmountable at this point in time. I had a home on my street that was a rental, rented to an older woman, working class woman, white, and a Puerto Rican man. The house was sold, both of them were displaced. I don't see how blacks can feel invited into this community when we're forcing white people, working class people out.
One of the things that's here is, and I'll just say this briefly, you're spot on, and that I am fully aware of here. I don't want us to, separate the orientation when we talk about race and class, because it's a reality. We know the statistics and the way they fall, particularly when we look at income, social mobility for black folks. Like, we know, of course, that even in the greater Boston area, the average white home, white wealth is $250,000, and it's $8 for black people. Right? So we understand those systemic elements. But you're right about the real class issue, and the fact that those are some of the things that we think about. How do we press those who make those decisions to think about how they allocate rental space, home? All of those things are necessary and they can't happen. Don't tell Sean this, but maybe I'll run for mayor and we'll see what we can do about this.
All right, at this point, we're going to have to kind of close it up just because we've run out of time. All of the questions that you have, you can email in to info@thepegcenter.org, and you can bring them as well to the next conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And thank you all for coming this evening. We appreciate you and your time.
Remember,